Nashville, Tennessee is home to some of the world's finest musicians. From country music to R&B to hip-hop and everything in between, if you've heard it, Nashville's got it. But ever since I moved to the city in 2013, I've met some incredible musicians who fall in between the cracks. Amazing musicians who are passionate about that other music. So I'm not here to talk about the music you've probably heard. I'm here to introduce you to them, illuminate their music, and share their stories. My name is David Rodgers. I'm an improviser, composer, and pianist here in Music City, USA, and I want to welcome you to the Improviser's Corner. Today's guest is one of Nashville's most sought-after bassists, Jimmy Sullivan. We discuss why Jimmy moved from New York City to Nashville, why he decided to stay in this scene, and all things improvisation here in Music City. I wanted to ask you, man, because I think you're the busiest person I know in terms of someone who's always playing. Like, you gig more than anybody I know. How do you balance that?
It's not easy. You know, I mean, I think when you make a lot of your living as a jazz musician, it's bands that have never played together, you know, it's rough around the edges a lot. It's difficult for me. I'm trying to get better at it because, yeah, you always want things to feel good and you always want things to be creatively satisfying. But yeah, if you're playing 2-3 times a night, that's not always the case. It's tough, I mean. What
do you do from an energy perspective to keep yourself on track?
It's weird. It's like, you might not know this. I took a little bit of a hiatus from music for a while where I was bartending and waiting tables. Okay. And I don't know how much they're correlated, but that's a hard way to make a living, especially when I was in New York. You know, I'd be working sometimes 60-hour weeks, but 40, 50 normally on your feet the whole time. And it just kind of felt like when I was able to go back to being full-time, because I was a full-time musician for many years, and then when I got back, I don't know, it just felt like I was shot out of a cannon. Yeah. This is like year 2 where I'm just doing gigs, and I never seem to get tired of it. Like, you know, I always think about the alternative.
You have more energy when I meet somebody than anyone else, really. It's like we all have like our slumps. I've never encountered that.
I stay very caffeinated. Yeah. That's, you know, spoil, you know, take you behind the curtains a little bit. I moved to New York from Virginia, and my goal was to try to be a jazz musician, and it just didn't work out, and it was really frustrating. Yeah, it's such a trite story, but like, I was kind of a big deal in Richmond, Virginia, but not a deal at all in New York, and I just couldn't get work. Yeah, it was about 3 years I really tried in earnest, and I was getting occasional gigs that either didn't pay, or I would get these gigs that paid $10, $15 for a 4-hour gig, which, you know, some of them would be like uptown. So I mean, like, literally I would be in a subway for 1 hour and 20 minutes to play for 4 hours to get $10 after years. And it was really frustrating, and I ran out of money, so I was, that's when I started waiting tables and bartending. And then eventually I just transitioned to that. How can I say this without sounding like corny? Like, I met people initially that were like, hey, you want to get together and jam?
I think I met you at a jam.
Yeah, I started going, and you know, that's the thing, like, I started going to the Nashville Jazz Workshop jams, and I met some bluegrass people, which I'd never played bluegrass before, but they were like, just come to our house and jam. So I started doing that, and then at the restaurant, you know, hey, I have some songs, you want to just get together and just play for fun? Yeah. And I think that did it. Like, I just lost my joy in New York. I play music because it's fun. You know, at the end of the day, I play music because I really like it and it's fun. And it stopped being fun in New York. And then in Nashville, it became fun again. And I remember, like, I was just jamming, and I was jamming a lot. I was just going and hanging out with people. I met Lindsay Miller, who's a good friend of mine. I met Matt Endall, and I just would go to their living room and just play for fun. And then it was like, hey, well, there's a thing, you know, it pays like $50. I mean, you don't have to say it. I was like, all right, sure, I'll do that. And then after a while, I was playing with 4 or 5 different groups, mostly singer-songwriter stuff. And then jazz started happening, and it just kind of kept piling up.
I remember I met you, I think, at they just shut down, but the Commodore Grill Jam.
Oh wow, yeah.
Like, maybe like three or 4 years ago. And I remember specifically because it was the jam portion, and I think we were playing, I think it was like Cherokee, just so fast.
Yeah.
Like probably like 340 or something. And like everyone else was just sort of like, you know, not going through the motions, but it was just like, we're playing Cherokee. You know, it's like a tune we all know. But I remember looking over at you, and you're just so into it, and you're like digging in, you're sweating. And I just remember like, this guy is bringing intensity that I really haven't felt.
It's, you know, when I first moved here and I was trying to play, like I said, I was just trying to play for fun again. It was depressing, man, trying to find jazz. Like, I described it as like an internet graveyard of jazz gigs and jam sessions that were. It was sad, man. I mean, like, there'd be a thing where it's like, jazz jam at this place, closed. Jazz jam at this place, closed. Or I would like click on it. It's like, this restaurant has been closed since, you know, 2005. Like, everything. I had to scroll down and scroll down. And now that Rudy's is here, there are some weeks where there's some pretty interesting music happening. You know, I'm really inspired by a lot of the music that's being made there. And I think a lot of the sea change that we're hoping will happen has to come from younger people. Like, obviously, guys like Jeff Coffin and Bruce Dudley and Jeff Berlin and Jim Ferguson, and I can keep going on and on, Duffy Jackson. There's obviously a lot of older guys that are absolutely amazing musicians, but like the people that come to the shows and the people that start new gigs tend to be younger people, the people that are still hungry and still trying to do things. I grew up listening to hip hop, and then when I first started playing bass in high school, I played mostly like, I grew up right outside of DC. So I played like punk rock, hardcore music. So I did that for a few years. And then when I started to study music formally, I went to community college, and there was a professor there who was an interesting character. He was a jazz DJ. He was also quite involved in politics. He was a member of the Black Panthers, and I believe he like marched with Martin Luther King. He was from Memphis. His name was Herb. And his concept for teaching, we didn't do scales, we didn't do anything. A lot of it was him just like ranting about social issues, sometimes turning tables over or kicking things. He was a very fiery individual. But like his concept for that was that he said jazz is black music. And he said that all black music is related. And something that he would say is, if you want to learn how to play jazz or phrase, listen to Mahalia Jackson, listen to Sam Cooke, listen to Michael Jackson, listen to Bob Marley, listen to Marvin Gaye. And when he would say that, the light that went off in my head was that through hip-hop, I was very familiar with James Brown. And I was very familiar with like Marvin Gaye. And I grew up also, I love Michael Jackson. So looking at it in that form, because jazz can be daunting. It's so much different than a lot of the music that you play. But if you look at it like, it's kind of a variation of soul music. And he would always describe rhythm as like, it's kind of like a dance. You just gotta learn how to dance. You just gotta learn how to feel rhythm. That was the first step for me to understanding jazz, was just thinking about it like, it's sort of like James Brown Band, it's sort of like Marvin Gaye, if that makes sense.
So you were almost studying jazz unconsciously while you grew up on hip hop then?
That's how I look at it. I love practicing. I love practice. I love the process. You know, I like getting better at things. I like marking progress. And you know, when I practice, one of the things that I do a lot is just repetitions of things. If I'm having trouble with something, I will take it down very slow with a metronome, and I try to do things either 25 or 50 times before I move on. And like when I'm practicing for the Jeff Pfeiffer gig, like maybe I'll just solo on Dolphin Dance 10 times in a row. And then I move on to the next thing and solo on that 10 times in a row, or 25 or 50. And so I do things in repetitions. And I actually, when I was in college, I went to the library one day and got all these books on basketball training. And I just was listening. I had vinyl, they had records. So I was like listening to Art Blakey records while I was dubbing them onto tapes. Sorry, I know you shouldn't do that, but I was. And reading, and like I came up with like a thing like run a suicide, you know, come back, dribble left-handed for a minute until the buzzer goes off, then right-handed till the buzzer goes off, then do crosses behind your back, then, you know, through the legs, then shoot 15 jumpers from here, 15 jumpers here, run another suicide, do 20 push-ups, jumpers from here, then practice your footwork. You know, I'd set up a chair, cross, try to get by it. I loved it. I almost loved that as much as playing. Yeah. Like just getting up in the morning and doing that. And it's similar. I mean, I have a routine. I get up every morning and usually it's like, boom, I have a 45-minute timer. Timers are always cool to me. Yeah. I used to love doing them in basketball, but I set 45 minutes. And then it's like 45 minutes singing, 45 minutes bass line construction, 45 minutes electric, 45 minutes soloing. Take a break, and then maybe I'll throw in, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 more 45-minute sessions. I try to do improvising every day, you know, whether it's playing along with like iReal Book, but the tunes that I'm doing with Stephanie or Jeff Pfeiffer or other groups, I try to go through soloing every day. I try to go through bass lines every day. I write out a lot of walking, and I have them all kind of on my tablet, so I might just be like, here's 10 choruses of Softly as a Morning Sunrise that I wrote a long time ago. I'll just read through that. And I always try to, like, every day, fast tempos. Okay. You know, try to keep that happening because that'll go quick.
Yeah. Who have been your biggest influences?
You ask really good questions.
I'm interested about you, man. Yeah.
You know, when I was in community college, again, being this punk rock kid, I had stickers all over my bass and long dyed yellow hair, trying to play jazz. The one thing that Herb would always shout out was, he wouldn't call me by my name, he'd always just call me bass player. He'd always just shout, you know, bass player, you're dragging! Bass player, it's so corny! You need to listen to Sam Jones, Percy Heath, Doug Watkins, Ron Carter. He would say those 4 names every time. I started listening. Sam Jones is one of my favorite bass players as far as walking and to feel. Percy Heath, Doug Watkins, Ron Carter, I love those guys. As far as bass playing, those are the 4 guys I've checked out the most. I've transcribed. It bums me out that I lost my books of transcriptions, but I had books of transcriptions from those guys. Those are my biggest influences. And then when I got to 4-year college, I became kind of obsessed with Christian McBride, and George Mraz is probably one of my biggest influences. I am obsessed with George Mraz. I love him. I get a lot, I mean, I draw a lot of inspiration from basketball players. Like, I mean, I feel like I can sort of relate to some of the, like, you know, like Jimmy Butler, for example, someone that was a late pick that nobody thought was going to be a star, who later in life was able to do it. And from everything I've read about Jimmy Butler, just the most tenacious worker you'll ever meet. And also just completely redefined his game. Guys that do that, Kawhi Leonard's another one, guys that, hey, this guy can't shoot. Because I couldn't solo for the longest time. I never cared about soloing. And this is like a recent thing that I've really devoted to myself to, that I always love that. I love the idea of a guy that's just a defensive guy that's like, you know what? I'm just going to go to the gym every day and learn how to shoot. And then Kawhi and Jimmy Butler, like, that's amazing. started learning jazz, you know, like everybody, I went to older guys. I went to guys that were good players and asked them, you know, hey, how do I do this? And they all kind of said the same thing. Don't worry about soloing, just time. Have good time, no tunes, and be able to like play a bossa and a samba and a waltz and a two-feel. Like if you can do that, that's all you have to do. And I remember talking to another older bass player guy, and he was like, you know what I do? When people ask me to solo, I just take like 2 A's. Like I never take a full chorus of solo, and people love that. And man, that like made a huge impression on me. Like, man, being a bass player is turn down solos, just focus on walking, which I did. Like my whole life for the first 6 years I played jazz was nothing but like improving my walking and two-feel. That was all I tried to do. And I kind of thumbed my nose at guys. I was a little bit of a hater. Like I'd see some guy take like this crazy long solo, I'd be like, ugh, I don't do that. I don't take long bass solos. Or like, I remember I saw some guy do like, and it was actually dope, but like he took a long like solo bass thing. I was like, psh, you know, I don't do that. I just walk blues forever. You know what I mean? Like I don't do that. I took some lessons. There was a bass player in DC named Ephraim Woolfolk. Great bass player, but he was a really heavy classical bass player, and then he played with Ahmad Jamal for a while, and he played in the Smithsonian Jazz Orchestra. But I took lessons with him, and it was crazy. I mean, he struck a nerve with me in that, let's play this classical etude. And again, I'm like, I don't play, let's try to play this classical etude. And of course it would be god-awful. Like I just bought the, you know, picked up a bass months ago, and he would literally, all right, this part, doom, 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 bump, click, click, doom, 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 doom. Take your hand off the bass. 2, 3, 4. Do, do. He would tell me to do it 25 times at like 50 beats per minute, and it just, that was the main takeaway from that. I was like, wow, that's how you practice. There was this guitar player in DC, Paul Piper, that's a hero of mine, and he is not a very disciplined practicer at all. He's just very naturally talented. But one thing he talked about is like, you know, people focus so much on books and method, and not that there's nothing to be gained from that, but man, go see great jazz, listen to great jazz. Like that's the textbook. That's the real textbook. And seeing that stuff live, you know, you see Ron Carter or Christian McBride or Dave Holland or Mark Johnson or George Mraz. I could go on, Avishai Cohen, Peter Washington, John Clayton. I sought those guys out. If it meant not going to a gig and driving 4 hours to go see it, I did it. Because that's how you learn. You see those guys live and it's like, wow, like that's how jazz should sound.